Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How's everyone going? We just had the release of Wave 2 in the world of X-Wing the Miniatures game. So it's time to talk about what came out in Wave 2, the new factions, and talk specifically about faction archetypes. Faction archetypes is a very interesting topic. It's gotten far more diverse in 2nd edition because of the addition of the new factions. The Resistance and First Order in 1st edition of X-Wing used to be part of the Rebellion and Empire respectively. Now they are entirely separate. FFG have added enough ships in the game, just enough ships in the game to make them their own separate faction. There are 4 ships on either faction, but most importantly, from a design point of view, they have their own unique faction archetypes, which is very, very important. Now, first to clarify what this video is. This is clarifying what FFG have put into these factions in terms of design. It's not about what's going to perform well in the meta, although that may be the case. I did a video a while back before 2nd edition came out, talking about the faction archetypes that FFG are pushing on the original 3 factions, and I'm glad to see that they're actually doing quite well. Currently on the Empire, Aces is pretty much the most prominent archetype. On the Scum faction, the Lone Wolf sort of value engine builds the most prominent archetype. And in the Rebellion, we're seeing a little bit of Jankyard being played. Not a whole heap of Rebellion lists making top 16s, but it is seeing a little bit of prominence. With the Resistance and First Order, there isn't a whole lot to talk about because, again, there's only 4 ships on either faction. And it is worth pointing out that, yes, they are very similar to their sort of predecessors. The First Order borrows a lot from the Empire, the Resistance borrows a lot from the Rebellion. But having said that, they have sort of taken away the good parts that they liked from First Edition, separated out from that original faction and put it into this new faction. Also, before we dive into these, I do want to talk in general about how excellent it is that these factions are separate. In terms of design, this means some really, really cool things. We're already seeing one of the benefits of separating out these factions in terms of what new ships FFG can put in the game. We now have the RZ2 A-Wing on the Resistance. And if this ship with this design existed in 1st edition, it would have a lot of overlap with the other A-Wing, which would cause a bit of confusion. Also, there is clear design directions in terms of how these ships function with their pilot abilities. And when we're talking about faction archetype, pilot abilities and unique upgrade cards, specifically crew cards, are the things that are most telling of those factors. So thanks to these factions being separate, we can now have very similar designs across different factions. It means if FFG want to make the FO Bomber, something that was sort of spoiled before The Last Jedi came out but never appeared in the movie, that is a possibility. It could be even very similar to the Imperial Bomber. That wouldn't be an issue because it would be on an entirely separate faction. They could play around with a lot of the same design space. And speaking about the same design space, let's dive into these. Let's look at a couple of archetypes on the First Order. And I'm going to say right at the bat, these archetypes already exist on the Empire faction, but because of the unique cards on the First Order, they're able to play around with their own design. First of all, we got to talk about Aces, because the First Order have some serious muscle in this category. They're the only faction that not only boasts 2 Initiative 6 hyperspace legal pilots, but they also have an Initiative 7 pilot in Null. Well, kind of Initiative 7. Null is Initiative 7 until he is damaged, which means he has a damage card assigned to his ship, so it actually means he's taken 2 points of damage at that stage. Which, alright, isn't permanent Initiative 7, but it's still something very unique to the faction, and you can still give him talents and load him up with abilities that help him arc dodge, help him capitalize off that. Something very, very unique. And even if we look beyond the Initiative 6 and 7s, we also have things like Blackout, Kylo Ren, Commander Malaris, a lot of very relevant abilities, a lot of very relevant ace-centric abilities, more to the point. There certainly is a critical mass of aces here, so I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some kind of meta ace list for the First Order. On top of all that, there is also the most powerful support ship in the game. The Upsilon class shuttle has a coordinate, has a 4-dice attack, and has 3 crew slots, so you can utilize all of the cool First Order stuff to help support those aces. It'll be interesting to see how these compare to things like Sunterfell and Vader and Whisper and all those kind of factors. Just looking at these, trying to quantify what it is the First Order does better than the Empire. I see the First Order as being a little bit less efficient overall, but a little bit more powerful overall. In fact, in some cases, a lot more powerful. Certainly feels like a much more spikier faction if you compare this Aces to the old ones. And from that point of view, it might just be the preferred faction when looking at the tournament grinders. So that's very, very interesting. Let's talk about the other major faction archetype we're seeing out of the First Order. And again, we're talking about the Upsilon class shuttle, the only ship that doesn't really have an ace to speak about. we're talking about the Commander archetype. And this is a term I coined back when we were talking about the Empire archetypes, because on the Empire, there are a lot of crew that have a massive support role that help a lot of your ships all at once. Back then, I was talking about Palp, Tarkin, Admiral Sloane, Director Krennic. Actually, it's worth pointing out that Admiral Sloane is seeing a bit of meta play right now. It's just this really great sort of solid value engine that gives you a bit of light control across the whole game and really supports a whole bunch of ships. In the First Order, we're looking at Supreme Leader Snoke, Kylo Ren, and General Hux. Again, not a whole heap of unique options here, but looking at these guys, it's clear to me that FFG is trying to push this. Now, in terms of how successful this is going to be, I look mainly at General Hux as a strong option, so long as there's a list to go alongside him. Remember guys, there's only 4 ships available on this faction right now, so as great as General Hux is in a vacuum, we do need to make sure we have a good sort of Upsilon plus 3 ship build that's going to work alongside this. And whether that's sort of like your aces or your more mid-range ships, perhaps even a swarm, I'm not too sure right now, but it is something to look out for. Something that feels a little bit more awkward to me is Supreme Leader Snoke, and I really like this ability again in a vacuum, but we do have to think about the ships that can fly alongside this. We're basically looking at TIFOs with Initiative 1 to sort of capitalize off this. It's kind of weird. The First Order does really seem to push high initiative ships. However, Supreme Leader Snoke, the Grand Supreme Leader of the First Order, likes to fly alongside lower initiative ships. That's kind of weird to me. I mean, it makes more sense if we had ships that could cloak or ships that had bombs, but we don't. There's no way to capitalize off this unless you have ships that specifically fly before your opponent's ships, which is kind of odd. I love this ability, don't get me wrong. I think it's really powerful. I think it's going to see some kind of meta play, so long, again, as there's the list to support it. And it is worth pointing out that Kylo alongside Supreme Leader Snoke is a possibility. There are 3 crew slots in the Upsilon class shuttle, so you can get the extra Force token. Kylo is very, very interesting because he can go in the Upsilon class shuttle and give yourself a way to capitalize off more aggressive ships. Now, as to what this goes alongside, again, this does feel a bit awkward. Because when we're looking at aces, we generally want to lean into a more versatile strategy. In terms of consistently delivering crits to your opponent, well, that might not be ideal in all scenarios. So it may even be the Upsilon class shuttle that ends up doing most of the work here. Indeed, in first edition, it was Rear Admiral Shenru, which was the best way to capitalize off this ability, because Rear Admiral Shenru was able to give you consistent crits. The First Order does not have decimators in second edition. So I'm looking at this, thinking about sort of more aggressive ace style builds. Maybe something involving a TIE silencer with Blackout or something. I don't know. Look, it's very clear to me that FFG are pushing this strategy across, but when you look at these 3 crew options, there's an asterisk next to all of them. We need some kind of way to enable these abilities. But hey, look, wave 3 onwards, we could have more ships on the First Order, which could suddenly make one of these very, very relevant. So it's definitely worth something keeping an eye on. Before we move on to the Resistance, I do want to make a special mention of TIE swarms here, because obviously the First Order has access to TIFOs. TIFOs are a little bit more expensive than the regular TIE fighter, and that's why I don't see it as being a major archetype with the First Order. In first edition, TIFOs were very useful in crack swarms. Crack swarms being a list with a lot of TIE fighters and lots of copies of crack shots. Just a lot of guns on the table, a lot of aggression, and the TIFO was a good point sink. I think it was like around 2 or 3 more points than the regular TIE fighter. So with the leftover points that you weren't using, you could just put TIFOs on the table and just get a little bit more value on the table. In second edition, crack swarms aren't really a thing right now, and we don't have TIE fighters and TIFOs on the same faction, so balancing those out, look, might be possible, but I'm not holding my breath. Let's move over to the Resistance, and this time I actually have 2 different archetypes than the Rebellion, which the Resistance is basically a predecessor of. First of all, we're going to talk about bombing, because bombing was a massive, massive thing for the Rebellion towards the end of first edition. It had a critical mass of pilots and abilities. Captain Nim, Miranda, it had the Resistance bombers as part of that faction in first edition. So there was a critical mass of things that you could sort of pick and choose from. Oh yes, the old Sabine crew and all that nonsense. Yeah, it was a great time. Bombing has been moved squarely off the Rebellion, primarily onto the Scum faction and Empire in terms of the 3 original factions. But it is clearly a very, very pushed archetype on the Resistance. In fact, when we're talking about design, it's the most pushed faction in terms of bombing. And the reason I say that is because, look, bombing is always a solid strategy. You can just have ships that use bombs and bombs with proton bombs and seismic charges. You don't need like sort of crazy pilot abilities or anything to make it work. It's pretty solid if you just build a list around that. But the Resistance also has a critical mass of setup cards and payoff cards for bombing. Setup cards being cards that help enable the way you bomb, give you a bit more flexibility. I'm talking about Paige Tico, Eden Capal, and even Finch Dallow. Remember, Paige Tico can help you bomb, but she can also help you move that arc. For that reason, I think she's a very, very competitive option in the gunner slot. There's even a fringe argument to take her on the Millennium Falcon. Those two abilities just feel very, very efficient. And seeing all these guys makes me think, great, well, we can take seismic and protons, your trajectory simulator, ablative plating, all that kind of stuff, and you have a very efficient bomb list. But on top of all this, we also have great payoffs for using bombs. In Bentine and Cat, Bentine providing your opponent ships with a rattle condition card and then causing them to take extra damage when they have a bomb blast near them. Very, very nasty stuff. And also Cat, giving you an offensive attack bonus when your opponent is near a bomb. This is especially interesting alongside Paige Tico, because Paige Tico allows you to drop a bomb with perfect information of where your enemy ships are going to be during the engagement phase. Now, that bomb does not go off until the next round, but the great thing about Cat is you get value out of that bomb before you even get the regular value out of that bomb exploding, which just feels really, really good. So if you take Cat alongside a higher initiative Star Fortress with Paige Tico attached to it, suddenly you have two platforms that can bomb efficiently, they give you a big payoff for bombing, and also have decent attacks. There's just a real sense when looking at the design of basically every single Star Fortress pilot, Paige Tico, all that kind of stuff, that FFG really are pushing bombing. And I gotta say, I like the way they're doing it in 2nd edition. The problem with bombing in 1st edition is it became quite oppressive because we started to bomb with perfect information, specifically Captain Nim, Trajectory Simulator, PS10, all that kind of nonsense. Now bombing is more versatile but more fair because it occurs during the system phase. The Star Fortress can get around that by giving you a bit of value, by dropping bombs with different timing, giving you benefits from just being near a bomb when you attack. Yeah, seems really, really solid. Very much looking forward to playing around with this myself. And finally, let's talk about the last archetype I want to mention for the Resistance. Now, this is interesting because we have a look at the design of Resistance pilots. They're very, very flashy and acy. They like to sort of show off, so to speak. And I'm thinking about a way to quantify this, and I was thinking back to my last video where I talked about like the sort of lone wolf value builds that the Scum faction has when they work quite well internally. And that is certainly true of these, but they're also kind of ace-like. Except they don't really seem to have the insane versatility of an ace. They're more like power spikes, where you can generate a whole heap of value in just the right situation. They're going to benefit the better flyers. And from that point of view, I just want to label these show-offs. The Resistance have a lot of show-offs. And in terms of list archetypes, I think we're going to see things that just include several ships that work very well internally. They have massive power spikes. They're versatile to a point. They're ace-like to a point. But it's all about flashy flying and rewarding the way you fly as a player. And that's really, really cool. I'm looking specifically at pilots like Han Solo or Rey on the Falcon, Poe Dameron on the T-70 X-Wing. In fact, Poe Dameron is the king of the show-offs, not just in canon, but also in the game as well. Lulo Lampor and the A-Wing is another example. Ilo Atsi, Nian Num. All those guys give you very sort of weird fringe abilities that, in the right circumstances, can just generate a ton of value and just wreck your opponent's ships if you just fly in just the right way. And I gotta say, this archetype more than anything else has got me excited. In fact, this is the reason I myself have bought into the Resistance. I really want to fly around with these flashy ships. I already like the sort of lone wolf builds for the Scum faction, and this feels like it's very much at home with that kind of approach. But things like Han and Poe Dameron, that is a list I'm very, very keen to fly. In fact, if we have a look at Han and Poe Dameron, yes, you can make the argument that there's a bit of synergy between them because they're both Initiative 6, but Poe Dameron being able to basically take on any ships he wants on his own. Han Solo deploying anywhere. He can take the Ray Gunner card. The Ray Gunner card, also a big factor of this archetype, because the Ray Gunner card, so long as you're defending or attacking when your opponent is inside your mobile arc, you are guaranteed a result. Every single dice roll, you cannot blank out with Ray. That is just such powerful insurance. It means you're going to hit harder, defend better. Really, really solid card. The fact that it's almost basically her pilot ability, but on an upgrade card, is very, very telling. It was very powerful in first edition. It's going to be powerful in second edition, and it really helps push this archetype quite a lot. Very excited to fly around with Ray or Han in the Ray Gunner Siege. Just see what kind of ridiculous powerful things we can do. And it's great to see that this kind of stuff still exists, that FFG are able to push it, but now that it's safely off the Rebel faction, anything that happens over here does not affect this. Junkyard Rebels can have a bit more of a design pushed in that direction, while the Resistance gets all their show-offy stuff, and the design is allowed to breathe. They can really explore both archetypes without them melding together and just sort of making broken lists, which unfortunately was kind of the direction the Rebellion was heading into towards the end of first edition anyway. Anyway guys, I hope you found that informative. Don't forget, we're still doing the Hangar Bay videos talking about all the new ships and all the old ships, so if you'd like me to review any of your list, feel free to put it down in the comment section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon. Thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. I cannot thank you enough. You are the guys that keep the lights on this channel. I'll catch you guys in the next video.